At 7:50, a spectacular lineup of summer stars, including Dollar, the Cambridge Buskers, the Stutz Bearcats, and many, many more. At 8:35, Disaster in the Skies in the Monday film Airport 75.
There's no one left to fly the plane!
At 10:35, highlights of the Edinburgh military tattoo of 1982. BA in Music at 11:50 rounds off Bank Holiday Monday entertainment on BBC1.
In a quarter of an hour on BBC1, The Sunday Prom combines Gilbert and Sullivan's short comic opera Trial by Jury with some short orchestral pieces by Percy Grainger, played by the BBC Concert Orchestra. And that's after the news with Jan Leeming now at 10:20.
Poland's leaders warn, keep off the streets next week or face the consequences. Zimbabwe, a personal appeal from Mr. Nkomo over 6 missing tourists. The lethal lorry, a ton and a half of explosives are found in Northern Ireland. And a warm welcome for the 2 who came in from the cold. Good evening. Poland's military leader, General Jaruzelski, urged the Polish people tonight not to demonstrate on Tuesday, the 2nd anniversary of the founding of the banned trade union Solidarity. Reports from Poland say tension in the country is building up. The Polish authorities have already warned that demonstrations are likely to lead to bloodshed. And today, General Jaruzelski said that any violation of martial law would not be tolerated. Our Europe correspondent Tim Sebastian listened to his speech.
The general was on familiar ground today, back with his soldiers and all the familiar phrases about duty and patriotism. The authorities, he said, had kept their side of the bargain, but there were enemies inside the country who hadn't. It was the same unbending military leader giving his people one more lesson in communist orthodoxy. So far, it's failed to prevent the crisis, failed to ease it, and may well fail to avert clashes on the streets next week. The Polish authorities have been showing increasing signs of sensitivity over Solidarity's anniversary. Today they called up Western newsmen and gave them one of the most direct warnings for many years. If you use your newspapers to incite unrest, they warned, we'll be forced to react in the most far-reaching way. Today, extra police patrols were on the streets of Warsaw. Military vans loaded with men were parked in a number of places in the city centre. And while the underground also made its final preparations, the clergy told their Sunday congregations what they thought of the situation. A message from the pulpits spoke of rebellion and anger, disappointment and despair.
Mr. Joshua Nkomo has begun what he calls a personal crusade for the release of 6 kidnapped tourists. They went missing 5 weeks ago in Zimbabwe, and tonight Mr. Nkomo, leader of the opposition ZAPU party, is camping in the bush at Lupani, waiting for word of them. 2 of the tourists are British, the others American and Australian. Philip Hayton reporting.
Joshua Nkomo's expedition into the bush went past the milestone where the tourists were kidnapped. He was soon out of his car and with the local people. He encouraged them to come forward with information. Until now, they've given the kidnapped gang safe passage because they sympathize with their grievances. The kidnappers' ransom demand is for Mr. Mugabe's government to stop what they call the harassment of Mr. Nkomo and to release from jail 2 former leaders of his guerrilla army. It's reckoned the hostages are still alive after an armed gang attacked a government truck near here and demanded money to buy food for some white people.
We appeal to those young men to immediately surrender these young people.
Today's foray into the bush represents a comeback for Mr. Nkomo. He's been out in the cold since Mr. Mugabe sacked him from the cabinet for allegedly plotting against the government. With 2,000 of his former fighters roaming the bush, the government now realizes there probably can't be a solution to the nation's tribal feuding without Mr. Nkomo's help.
If any one person can secure the release of the hostages, it's Joshua Nkomo. This is his part of the country, and these are his people. His intervention is probably the most hopeful sign so far in the 5-week hunt for the hostages.
Police in the Republic of Ireland have found an arms cache of 10,000 bullets and 150 pounds of gelignite. They turned up in a forest search near Enniskerry in County Wicklow. Hours earlier, police in the north stopped a lorry near Banbridge in County Down. They found 1.5 tons of explosives, fuses and detonators. With the details, Austin Hunter.
The lorry was stopped by police at Banbridge, about 25 miles south of Belfast. The explosives, fuse wire and detonators were in 60 plastic bags, carefully hidden by bales of straw. Many of the car bombs which have wrecked towns all over Northern Ireland have been around 200 pounds in size. This haul was 15 times more powerful.
The RUC say they're absolutely delighted about the find. It's one of the biggest they've ever made, if not actually the biggest. But there's one thing which is likely to still be worrying the police. That is that if the terrorists can afford to put such a massive haul of explosives onto one vehicle, it would seem as if they may have no shortage of supplies.
British Telecom, which last week announced record profits of £458 million, is planning to cut its workforce by 15,000, but no one is expected to be made redundant. A spokesman said the reductions would be achieved over 5 years by natural wastage and by taking away the right of some staff to stay on after reaching retirement age. In France, the arrest last night of 2 suspected terrorists at a flat on the outskirts of Paris is being seen as the first success of President Mitterrand's new measures to counter political extremism. A third person, a woman, was detained later, and explosives and documents were also seized. The operation by a special police unit follows a series of anti-Jewish attacks in the French capital, culminating in the raid on a Jewish restaurant in which 6 people died. The evacuation of Palestinian fighters from Beirut continued with the second overland convoy to Syria leaving this morning. The Italian contingent of the peacekeeping force complained about Israeli flags prominently displayed on the route out of the city. Israel said it was a response to the flaunting of Palestinian banners. From Beirut, Keith Graves.
An Israeli military spokesman described it as a game, but the flying of the Israeli flags along the evacuation route almost brought the pullout to a halt. The Italians supervising the operation said it was a breach of the withdrawal agreement and indulged in verbal protests. And the Palestine Liberation Army said it was provocation. But the flags stayed, so the PLA men indulged in a bit of flag waving of their own and left anyway en route to Syria. Their departure marks another important step in the withdrawal process. These are not PLO men, but a Palestinian